The guard halted with one foot forward, weight held back on the heel. East Hall had its own climate, always cooler than the adjoining galleries, the stone retaining the day's cold long after dusk. The service door should have been flush, sealed by magnetic lock and logged twice, once by the system, once by the human hand that confirmed it. It stood open just enough to disturb the corridor's geometry, 3 fingers wide, enough to invite air movement, enough to invite error. He did not touch it immediately. He listened. The palace at this hour made a particular sound, distant ventilation, the low mechanical hum of lighting circuits, a faint echo where footsteps had been hours earlier. Tonight another note sat beneath it, a shallow scrape, intermittent, like fabric shifting against a wall. He checked his wrist display without lowering his gaze. No alerts, no overrides. The corridor camera opposite the door showed a static image, timestamp frozen 6 minutes behind real time. Not unusual during maintenance windows, unacceptable during sealed hours. Protocol required a call. Protocol also required certainty. He placed 2 fingers against the door edge, feeling for resistance. None. The hinge mark was new, bright metal where paint should have dulled it. He eased the door inward, controlling its movement so the latch made no sound. Inside, the service corridor narrowed. Utility lights glowed at half power, throwing uneven shadows along the floor. A child stood at the far end, near a linen cart pushed hard against the wall. The boy's posture was rigid, hands pressed flat against his thighs, as if instructed to remain still. His breathing was shallow and controlled, practiced beyond his years. The guard closed the door behind him without locking it. He moved slowly, boots placed heel to toe to minimize sound. He did not announce himself. Children in the palace were trained to respond to titles and uniforms, but surprise could undo that training. He lowered himself slightly as he approached, reducing his profile. The boy's eyes tracked him before his head moved. Recognition came without relief. That, more than the open door, confirmed the irregularity. "Stay where you are," the guard said quietly. Not a command, a boundary. The child nodded once. His gaze flicked toward the service door they had entered through, then away. The guard followed the look. Nothing moved. Still, he adjusted his stance, placing himself between the boy and the corridor beyond. He reached the linen cart and rotated it outward, creating a shallow alcove. The movement revealed scuff marks on the floor, fresh, overlapping. Adult shoes. The guard guided the boy behind the cart with a hand placed carefully at the shoulder blade, pressure light, directional. The child complied without comment. "Sit," the guard said. The boy sat, knees drawn close, shoes aligned neatly as if order might offer protection. The guard removed his outer jacket and draped it over the cart's edge, breaking sightlines from both ends of the corridor. He keyed his radio, but did not transmit. The channel was live. He could hear routine traffic. No one mentioned East Hall. He shifted his weight, blocking the child completely now, and prepared to make a decision that could not be undone once spoken. The footsteps resumed, retreating. The sound thinned and dissolved into the palace's background hum. The guard did not relax. He reached up and disabled his personal location beacon, a temporary measure permitted during containment drills, but rarely used outside them. The icon on his display dimmed. He noted the time automatically. He turned back to the child. The boy's breathing had deepened slightly, though his eyes remained fixed on the guard's chest insignia rather than his face. "You're safe here," the guard said. It was not reassurance, it was a statement of current condition. The child nodded again. He shifted, adjusting his jacket-covered knees. The movement exposed a faint red line on his wrist, already fading. The guard saw it and looked away, storing it for later without acknowledgement. Not yet. Protocol dictated immediate escalation when a minor was found outside assigned zones. It also dictated that a found minor be returned to their last authorized supervisor without delay. The guard stood in the narrow space between those directives, aware that choosing one too quickly could erase the context the other required. He keyed the radio, selecting a low-priority internal channel. East Hall secure, conducting routine verification. There was a pause, then an acknowledgement tone. No voice. That was acceptable. It bought him minutes. He repositioned the linen cart slightly, angling it to conceal the child more fully while maintaining airflow. The corridor smelled faintly of detergent and old stone. The light flickered once, then steadied. The guard knelt again, this time farther back, giving the child space. "What's your name?" he asked. The child hesitated. His gaze dropped to the floor. "James," he said, barely audible. The guard inclined his head. He did not use the title. Names carried weight. He used it carefully. "James, I need you to stay quiet for a moment. Can you do that?" "Yes," the child said. The answer came too quickly, rehearsed. The guard stood and moved to the service door. He checked the lock manually. It engaged without resistance. He left it unlocked. A locked door would draw questions. An open one could be explained as oversight. He paced the corridor once, mapping exits and blind spots. There was a service room adjacent, its door closed, handle scuffed. He tested it, locked from the outside. He did not open it yet. His radio vibrated softly, an incoming query, administrative. He ignored it. Silence was still an option. Returning to the child, he adjusted the jacket again, ensuring it covered the boy's hands. "If anyone speaks to you," he said, "you look at me. You don't answer unless I say it's all right." James nodded. His jaw tightened, then released. The guard felt the weight of time pressing in. Every minute unlogged increased risk, but so did premature reporting. He chose a narrow path between them, one that allowed observation without accusation. He keyed the radio again, requesting delayed escort for minor, routine misplacement, he said. "Stand by." This time a voice answered, clipped and neutral. "Copy. Await further." The guard ended the transmission. He looked down at James, who had begun to rock slightly, a motion so small it might have been imagined. "Stay still," he said gently. James stopped. The corridor remained quiet. No alarm sounded. No footsteps approached. The palace continued its routines, unaware of the small deviation forming within its walls. The guard checked the time again. He had minutes left before absence became noticeable. He straightened, shoulders squared, and positioned himself at the corridor's midpoint, eyes forward. Behind him, hidden by fabric and steel, the child waited. The guard did not look at the clock again. He felt time instead, the way it tightened the space, compressing choices. East Hall remained quiet, but quiet inside a palace was never neutral. It meant activity elsewhere. It meant systems compensating. He adjusted his stance so his body blocked the corridor's long sightline. James remained behind the linen cart, knees tucked in, the guard's jacket still draped like a temporary wall. The boy had not moved since being told to stay still. That compliance unsettled the guard more than panic would have. A low chime sounded in the guard's earpiece. Internal traffic shifted frequencies. Someone was reassigning patrols. He crouched again, this time closer, keeping his voice low enough that it blended with the corridor's mechanical hum. "James," he said, using the name sparingly. "I'm going to ask you something. You don't have to answer if you're not ready." The boy's eyes lifted slightly. He nodded once. "Do you know why you were here?" the guard asked. Silence followed. The guard waited, counting breaths without appearing to. James swallowed, his throat working. When he spoke, it was barely more than air. "I was told to wait," he said. "Told by who?" the guard asked. James shook his head. The motion was small, defensive. His gaze shifted toward the closed service room door without fully turning his head. The guard noted the direction. He did not follow it with his eyes. "How long were you waiting?" he asked instead. James hesitated. "A long time." The guard accepted the imprecision. Children measured time differently, especially under stress. He adjusted his balance, keeping one knee grounded, one foot ready. "Were you alone the whole time?" Another pause. This one carried weight. James's fingers curled into the fabric of the jacket, knuckles whitening briefly before relaxing. "No," he said. The answer settled heavily. The guard did not react. Reaction could close the channel. "Did anyone tell you not to leave?" he asked. "Yes." "Did they lock the door?" The guard kept his tone even, procedural. James nodded. The guard's jaw tightened once, then released. External locking of a service room was not permitted under any circumstance, especially not with a minor inside. He knew that. James did not need to. "Did you call for help?" the guard asked. He hesitated, then nodded again. "Once." The guard remembered the voice, thin and controlled, carried down the corridor like something practiced into restraint. "What happened when you did?" he asked. James looked down. "I was told to be quiet." The guard shifted his weight slightly, angling his body so he could see both the child and the corridor entrance. His radio vibrated again. He silenced it without looking. Protocol required that any statement from a royal minor regarding confinement be logged immediately, verbatim, and transmitted to command. That process triggered automatic notifications, including to those who might already be implicated. Logging too early could place the child back into the system that had failed him. Not logging was its own violation. The guard chose his words carefully. "James," he said, "I will need to write it down later. Right now, my job is to make sure nothing else happens. Do you understand?" James nodded, eyes still down. The guard stood, slowly, giving the child space again. He moved toward the service room door, stopping short of touching it. He studied the handle, the scuffed metal, the faint indentation where something heavy had rested against it. He did not open it yet. Behind him, James shifted. The guard heard the movement and turned back. "Sir," James said, the word unfamiliar in his mouth. He rarely used it. "Yes," the guard said. "They said I shouldn't talk to guards. They said it would make things worse." The guard absorbed that without comment. He nodded once, acknowledging receipt rather than agreement. "Stay with me. I'll decide what happens next." James drew his knees in tighter. The guard keyed his radio, selecting a private channel he rarely used. "Status update pending. Delay escalation," he said calmly. There was a brief pause. "On whose authority?" came the reply. The voice was measured, not suspicious, yet. The guard did not answer immediately. He looked down at the child, then back at the corridor, weighing seconds against consequences. "Mine," he said. He ended the transmission before a follow-up could come. The silence that followed was different. It carried expectation. The guard returned to the child and crouched again, maintaining distance. He did not touch James this time. Touch could be misinterpreted later, no matter how benign. "James," he said. "I need to understand one more thing. Did anyone say why you were locked inside?" James shook his head. "They said it was for practice." "For practice for what?" the guard asked. James frowned slightly, searching. "For listening," he said. The answer landed with precision. The guard did not let it show. He nodded once. "All right." He stood and moved to the service room door. This time he placed his palm flat against it. The wood was cool, solid. He leaned in slightly, listening. Nothing. He tested the handle again. Locked, firm. He did not open it. Not yet. Opening it would escalate the situation from irregularity to incident. He needed more control before that happened. He returned to the linen cart and adjusted the jacket again, ensuring James remained fully concealed. "I'm going to step a short distance away," he said. "I'll still be able to see you. If anyone comes, you don't speak unless I tell you to." "Yes," James said. The guard stepped back toward the corridor midpoint, positioning himself where he could intercept anyone entering from either end. His presence alone altered the space, reasserting order through posture and stillness. Footsteps approached, this time with purpose, measured, a single person. The guard recognized the cadence before the figure appeared, administrative staff, not security. A man in a tailored jacket rounded the corner and stopped short when he saw the guard. "East Hall is sealed," the man said, neutral but firm. "So is the child," the guard replied calmly. The man's eyes flicked briefly toward the linen cart, then back. "Return him," he said. "This is being handled." The guard did not move. "I'm verifying," he said. "By whose directive?" The guard met his gaze. "Standing duty of care." The man exhaled through his nose, a controlled release. "You're exceeding your remit." The guard held his ground. "I'm within it." A beat passed. The man's jaw tightened. He lowered his voice. "Log the child's statement and return him, now." The guard did not respond immediately. He glanced back toward James, still hidden, still silent. "Negative," the guard said. "Not yet." The man's expression hardened. "That's not your decision." The guard's hand moved closer to his radio. "It is until I transmit." Silence stretched between them, heavy and deliberate. Somewhere deeper in the palace a door closed, systems adjusted. The man stepped back half a pace. He said, "You're making this difficult." The guard remained still. It already was. Behind him, unseen, James held his breath. The next order had not yet been given. The guard knew it would come soon, and that when it did, refusing it would change everything. The order did not come immediately. That in itself was information. The administrative official withdrew without another word, footsteps receding down East Hall with deliberate restraint. The guard did not pursue. He remained where he was, posture unchanged, eyes forward, listening until the sound dissolved into the palace's ambient systems. Only then did he move. He crossed back to the linen cart and crouched. James looked up at him, eyes wide but dry. The child had learned when not to cry. "We're going to move," the guard said quietly. "Just a short distance." James nodded and waited for instruction before standing. The guard guided him with a light gesture toward a side passage that connected East Hall to a service monitoring alcove, unused during evening hours, overlooked by most. It was not an authorized shelter location. It was, however, out of sight and within reach of systems access. Once inside, the guard positioned James on a bench beneath inactive displays. He adjusted the lighting down another level, dim but functional. The air smelled faintly of warm circuitry. "Sit here," he said. "Don't touch anything." James complied, hands folded neatly in his lap. The guard turned to the terminal. Access required biometric confirmation. He placed his palm on the reader. The system hesitated, then unlocked. He navigated without haste, pulling corridor logs, camera status, access timestamps. East Hall's feed showed a 6-minute gap, not a full blackout, worse, a manual pause. Someone had frozen the image, then restored it. The timestamp discrepancy aligned precisely with the child's estimate of a long time, accounting for how children compressed stress into memory. He cross-referenced door access. The service room showed a lock engagement from the outside, registered under a master override credential. No name attached, only a tier. That tier sat above his own. The guard felt the shift internally, the moment when uncertainty gave way to clarity. This was no procedural error, it was intentional, and it was insulated. He saved local copies to an encrypted buffer, knowing full well that duplication itself could be flagged. He accepted that risk. Some risks were linear, others were cumulative. This one mattered. A soft sound behind him, James adjusting his feet. The guard turned slightly, ensuring the child remained in view without inviting conversation. "Are you cold?" he asked. James shook his head. The guard removed his gloves and placed them beside the boy. James did not touch them. The radio vibrated again, more insistent now. The guard checked the sender ID. Command operations. "Report," the voice said, no greeting. "Reviewing irregularity," the guard replied evenly. "Escalation required. Why has the child not been returned?" The guard glanced at the terminal, at the frozen timestamp, the missing minutes. Discrepancy in access logs, clarifying before transfer. Silence. Then, "You are not authorized to audit at this level." The guard accepted that. "I'm authorized to protect," he replied. Another pause, this one shorter. "You're treading close to insubordination." The guard did not respond. He ended the transmission cleanly. He turned back to the terminal and pulled one final record, the master override usage history. It populated slowly, then stopped, restricted, above even this console's clearance. That, too, was an answer. He locked the terminal and stepped back. James watched him carefully, reading posture more than words. "We'll stay here a bit longer," the guard said. James nodded. Footsteps approached again, heavier this time, multiple, security cadence. The guard positioned himself between the alcove entrance and the child, shoulders squared, expression neutral. He had crossed a threshold. The system would respond. The first two officers appeared at the alcove entrance and stopped when they saw him. Their uniforms were standard, their expressions controlled. One of them glanced past him, eyes narrowing slightly as he registered the child's presence. "This area is restricted," the lead officer said. "So is East Hall," the guard replied. "We've been instructed to escort the child back to his assigned quarters," the officer said. His tone suggested routine, but his stance was braced. The guard did not move. "Pending clarification," he said. "There's a documented access anomaly." The second officer shifted his weight, hand resting near his radio. "We don't have that information." "I do," the guard said. "Then transmit it." The guard considered the child behind him, silent, still. Transmission now would route the data through the same hierarchy implicated in the anomaly. He shook his head once. Not yet. The lead officer's jaw tightened. "You're creating a situation." The guard met his eyes. "It already exists." A third figure stepped into view. Older, civilian attire, authority carried without insignia. "That will be enough," the man said calmly. "Stand aside." The guard did not recognize him by face, but he recognized the tone, someone accustomed to compliance. "State your authority," the guard said. The man smiled faintly. "You know it." The guard did not respond. He reached back without looking and placed a hand lightly on James's shoulder, a silent signal to remain still. There is a missing 6-minute interval in East Hall surveillance. A service room was externally locked using a master override. A minor was confined without supervision. Until that is addressed, the child remains under my protection. The man's expression did not change. "You're overinterpreting routine safeguards." The guard shook his head. "Safeguards don't remove logs." A beat passed. The air felt warmer, the alcove smaller. "You will return the child. You will file no preliminary report. Full review will be conducted later." The words were measured, precise, an order crafted to sound reasonable. The guard inhaled once, steady. He thought of the frozen timestamp, the scuffed door handle, the child's controlled breathing. He thought of the line he had already crossed. He said, "No." The word landed without emphasis. The officers shifted. Radios stirred. Somewhere above them, systems recalculated. "You understand the consequences," the man said. "Yes," the guard replied. "Then you leave me no choice." The man nodded slightly to the officers. They hesitated, just long enough for the guard to know they understood what this meant. The guard straightened, placing himself fully between them and James. He did not raise his voice. He did not threaten. He waited. The palace, immense and composed, held its breath as protocol and instinct collided, no longer quietly, no longer unseen. The officers did not advance. Not yet. Their hesitation was brief but telling, a fraction of a second where training competed with context. The guard read it and adjusted his posture, widening his stance just enough to signal resolve without aggression. The civilian official stepped forward instead, closing the distance by a measured pace. He stopped short of the guard's personal space, careful not to escalate by proximity. Up close, his face showed the controlled fatigue of someone who had managed systems for too long, creased, composed, accustomed to being obeyed. "You're making assumptions," the man said quietly, "dangerous ones." The guard did not answer immediately. He was listening, not to the man, but to the building. The ventilation shifted again. A door closed somewhere above. Movement was being rerouted. "I observed a locked room, a missing log entry, a child found without supervision. Those are not assumptions." "They are fragments," the man replied. "Fragments you're assembling into a narrative you're not qualified to write." The guard held his gaze. "I'm not writing a narrative. I'm preventing harm." The man's eyes flicked briefly toward the alcove bench, where James sat motionless, hands folded. "The child is not harmed," he said. "You're projecting risk where none exists." The guard shook his head once. "Harm isn't only physical." That earned a slight narrowing of the man's eyes. "You're drifting into interpretation," he said. "That's not your role." The guard reached slowly for his radio and removed the earpiece, placing it on the console beside him. The gesture was deliberate. It signaled that what followed would not be filtered through channels. "My role," the guard said, "is to intervene when protocol fails to protect the vulnerable." The man exhaled softly. Protocol did not fail. It was applied. The guard felt the words settle, heavy with implication. Then it was misused. The officers exchanged glances. One of them shifted, uncomfortable. The man straightened slightly. "Listen carefully," he said. "You will return the child to his assigned guardian. You will record nothing beyond a routine misplacement. This matter ends here." The guard did not move. "I can't do that." "You can," the man corrected. "You're choosing not to." The guard acknowledged that silently. Choice was the correct word. The man continued, voice even. "If you persist, you will be removed from duty. Your access will be revoked. Your career will end here, in this room." The guard glanced back at James. The boy had not looked away once. He was watching the exchange, reading posture and tone, learning where power sat and where it pressed. The guard turned back. "Then it ends," he said. A beat passed. The man's expression hardened, not with anger, but with calculation. "You think this protects him," he said. "It doesn't. It exposes him." The guard considered that. Exposure was a risk. Silence was another. "I'll accept that risk. He doesn't have that option." The man's mouth tightened. He lifted his hand slightly, signaling the officers. One of them reached for his radio. Before he could speak, the guard raised his palm. Not a command, a pause. "Before you proceed," he said, "you should know the access anomaly has been locally preserved." The man's eyes sharpened. "You duplicated restricted data?" "I preserved evidence," he replied. "That's a serious violation." "Yes." The man studied him for a long moment, reassessing. "You're forcing escalation," he said. "No, I'm acknowledging it." The man nodded once. Decision made. "Very well," he said. "Formal orders will follow." He turned and walked out, the officers falling in behind him. Their footsteps retreated, heavier than before. The alcove fell quiet again. The guard exhaled slowly. He had bought time. He did not know how much. He turned to James. "You did well," he said simply. James nodded, but his hands trembled once before settling again. The guard keyed the console, initiating a medical services request under routine evaluation codes, non-alarming, standard. He sent it without commentary. Outside the alcove, the palace resumed movement, unaware that lines had shifted. Inside, the guard waited for the orders to arrive.
They arrived sooner than expected. The guard's console chimed. A direct command packet, priority sealed. He opened it without hesitation. The language was precise, stripped of excess. "Return minor to designated authority immediately. Cease independent action. File no supplementary report. Non-compliance will result in immediate suspension pending inquiry." The guard read it once, then again. He felt the finality settle into his shoulders, the quiet recognition that there would be no soft landing from this. He closed the packet without acknowledging receipt. James watched him closely. "Am I in trouble?" the boy asked. The guard turned toward him, surprised by the question more than its content. He crouched, keeping his voice low. "No," he said, "you're not." James considered that. "They said I was," he said. The guard did not ask who they were. He already knew enough. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said. He let that sit, knowing repetition mattered more than emphasis. Footsteps approached again, brisk this time. The guard arose and positioned himself at the alcove entrance. 2 security officers appeared, different from before. Their expressions were professional, distant. "Orders received," the lead officer said. You are to stand down. The guard nodded once. Understood. The officers paused, clearly not expecting compliance. Then release the child, the officer said. The guard did not step aside. Negative, he said calmly. I'm invoking temporary protective custody. On what basis? Safeguard Clause 17, immediate risk pending medical evaluation. That clause requires command approval. It allows for delay pending assessment. Assessment has been requested. The officers exchanged glances. One checked his device. Medical is en route. That wasn't authorized. It is now, the guard replied. The lead officer hesitated. He was younger than the guard, less settled in his authority. You're complicating this, he said quietly. Yes, the guard agreed. The officer exhaled, then nodded. We'll wait, he said. Minutes passed. James remained seated, silent. The guard watched, back straight, eyes forward. When medical personnel arrived, their presence shifted the tone. Clinical neutrality entered the space, disarming some of the authorities' sharp edges. The guard briefed them briefly, sticking to observable facts. James was examined quietly, respectfully. No questions pressed, no conclusions drawn aloud. The results were preliminary, but sufficient. The guard knew what came next. He turned back to the console and initiated a full report, complete, chronological, unfiltered. He attached the preserved logs. He routed it not upward, but outward, to independent oversight channels rarely used and quietly resented. He submitted it. The system accepted it without comment. A weight lifted and settled simultaneously, relief and consequence intertwined. The guard removed his insignia and placed it on the console beside the gloves. He straightened his jacket, now bare of markers. James watched him. Are you leaving? He asked. Yes, the guard said. James nodded slowly. Thank you, he said. The guard inclined his head. No speeches, no promises. He stepped aside as James was escorted, not back into the system that had failed him, but into one newly engaged. As the guard was led away, access revoked, career concluded, the palace continued to stand, stone and protocol intact. But the record existed now, and that would have to be enough.
The transfer corridor was narrower than the public halls, designed to move staff unseen and without ceremony. The guard walked at the front, no longer in uniform, hands visible, posture unchanged. Two internal security officers flanked him at a respectful distance, not escorting so much as containing the process. Behind them, James moved with the medical attendant, steps short and careful, eyes forward. The guard did not look back. He tracked reflections instead, catching the child's movement in polished stone and glass. James stayed close to the attendant, jacket still draped over his shoulders. The garment marked continuity more than protection now, a signal that the chain of care had not been broken. At the assessment room, the guard stopped. This was as far as he would go. The door closed softly behind James and the medical team. The sound was ordinary, final. The guard stood alone in the corridor, stripped of access, but not of awareness. He noted the temperature, warmer here, air recycled more aggressively. He noted the absence of cameras within immediate range, deliberate design. Minutes passed. No one spoke to him. That, too, was deliberate. When the door reopened, the attending physician stepped out first. Her expression was controlled, professional. She nodded once at the guard, not acknowledgement, not gratitude, confirmation. He'll remain under observation, independent. The guard nodded. He did not ask questions. He did not need answers spoken aloud. Further down the corridor, a figure waited, Not security, oversight, civilian, neutral, bearing credentials rarely displayed unless something had already gone wrong. The guard recognized the shift immediately. The palace was no longer managing this internally. The oversight representative approached him, posture open but cautious. "You're no longer authorized to be here, but your report was received." The guard met her eyes. "Then my presence isn't required." "Not here," she agreed, "but your account will be." He inclined his head. That had always been the likely outcome. Behind the closed door, James would be asked questions, gently, methodically, without urgency. The guard trusted that process more than the one he had interrupted. A security officer approached, holding a tablet. "You'll be escorted out," he said. The guard accepted that without resistance. As they walked, he felt the building's systems disengage from him one layer at a time, doors no longer responding, corridors subtly rerouted. The palace was efficient in separation. They passed East Hall. The service door was closed now, flush, seamless. The corridor camera blinked live, timestamp correct. The guard did not slow. Restoration was expected. Erasure would come later, quieter. At the exit, the officer stopped. He said, "You should know, this won't stay clean." The guard nodded. "It never does." Outside, the air was colder, sharper. Night had settled fully. He stood for a moment, breathing it in, recalibrating to a world without layered authority. Inside the palace, protective custody had been established, not because protocol allowed it easily, but because someone had forced it into existence. That knowledge steadied him as he turned away.
The call came the next morning. The guard was already awake, seated at a small table, reviewing nothing. Habit lingered even when duty did not. The device vibrated once, then stopped. A withheld number. He answered without greeting. "Your statement is required," the voice said. Female, measured, oversight again. "When?" the guard replied. "Now, if possible." "It is." The location was not the palace. It never was. A neutral office, deliberately unremarkable. The guard arrived early, sat where directed, hands folded, posture straight. No uniform, no insignia, only memory. They asked him to recount events, chronologically, without inference. He did. He described the door, the camera feed, the child's posture, the service room lock, the missing minutes. He did not speculate. He did not assign motive. He spoke only to what he observed and what he did. When asked why he delayed logging the child's statement, he paused, not to reconsider, but to choose accuracy. "Immediate logging would have returned the child to an environment I could not verify as safe," he said. "I chose to prioritize containment over procedure." The room remained quiet as the answer settled. They asked about the order he refused. He recited it precisely. They asked if he understood the consequences at the time. Yes. They asked if he would make the same decision again. Yes. No follow-up came. None was needed. When the interview ended, the oversight lead stood. "Your career here is concluded," she said. "You knew that." "Yes," the guard replied. "There may be legal inquiry. I'll cooperate." She nodded. "The child will not be returned to his prior supervisory chain." The guard felt that, not as relief, but as completion. Outside, daylight cut clean lines through the city. Life moved without reference to palaces or protocols. He walked for a time, hands in his pockets, adjusting to a slower rhythm. Days later, a brief notice arrived. Suspension formalized. Inquiry pending.
language precise, emotionless. Another message followed, unofficial. James had been transferred to an independent residence supervised by external guardians. No details, just enough. The guard deleted the message after reading it once. At night, he sometimes thought of East Hall, not with regret, but with clarity. The moment where stillness had broken into action, where a line had been drawn not by rank, but by responsibility. The palace would endure, it always did, but somewhere beyond its walls, a child slept without a locked door, and that was sufficient. The service room was smaller than it appeared from the corridor, a rectangular utility space with unfinished walls and a ceiling dropped low enough to hold heat. The guard entered alone. Oversight had cleared the room for inspection, but no one followed him inside. Observation would come later, through transcripts and photographs. For now, the space belonged to memory and method. The door closed behind him with a muted click. He did not lock it. He stood still for several seconds, letting the room present itself without interference. The air carried a faint metallic tang layered over detergent, cleaning agents applied recently, too recently. The light was harsh, a single overhead fixture casting flat illumination that erased shadows but revealed scuffs on the floor. Parallel marks where shoes had pivoted, where weight had shifted. He knelt and traced one mark with his eyes, not his fingers. Adult tread, formal sole, not maintenance, not medical. The pattern suggested pacing confined to a short radius. He counted steps from the door to the opposite wall. 6. From wall to cabinet. 4. There was nowhere to sit except the floor. The lock mechanism drew his attention next. The exterior handle bore a shallow indentation, the kind left by repeated pressure rather than impact. The internal latch was intact, untouched. He tested it from inside. It turned freely. No child could have locked it. No child could have unlocked it. He photographed the door frame, the bolt housing, the strike plate. He documented the override port, still warm to the touch despite the room's otherwise cool surfaces. Someone had stood here long enough for heat to transfer through metal. On the far wall, beneath a utility panel, he found a smear, light, nearly invisible unless the angle caught it. Skin oil. Possibly a child's hand, braced for balance. He did not collect a sample. Oversight would decide that. His task was to record, not contaminate. He opened the cabinet. Inside were cleaning supplies arranged with exaggerated neatness, labels aligned. The order felt imposed, corrective, a response rather than a routine. He closed it and stepped back, reconstructing sequence. The child had been brought in, told to wait. The door had been closed and locked externally. Time had passed, enough for anxiety to settle into controlled silence, enough for someone to return and instruct restraint rather than release. The guard straightened and exhaled. The room was not violent. That made it more dangerous. Coercion lived comfortably in quiet spaces. A knock sounded at the door. He opened it to find the oversight representative waiting, tablet in hand. "You've seen enough," she said. "Yes," he replied. They stepped out together. The corridor beyond felt larger after the compression of the room. The guard glanced once more at the door before it closed again, sealing the space back into the palace's hidden architecture. This room confirms external confinement and prior occupancy, said the guard. It aligns with the logs you preserved, said the representative. Then it wasn't an anomaly, the guard said. No, she agreed. It was a method. They walked in silence for a short distance. The guard felt the familiar tension return, not urgency now, but the weight of implication. This room had existed long before tonight. It will exist long after, unless the record force change. The guard slowed near the junction where East Hall branched away. The representative stopped with him. There will be resistance, not publicly, internally. There always is, the guard replied. She studied him for a moment. You won't be part of the internal process. I know. The corridor lights dimmed slightly as systems adjusted for evening. Somewhere, doors opened and closed. Routine resumed. The guard turned away from East Hall, carrying the room with him, not as a place, but as proof.
The documentation phase began immediately. Photographs catalogued, measurements logged, timestamps verified against the preserved buffer. The guard observed from a distance now, invited only when clarification was required. He answered without embellishment, without defense. They asked him to describe the child's demeanor again, specifically upon discovery. Controlled, he said, over-controlled. They asked what that suggested. That someone had instructed him to manage his response. No one argued. The oversight team moved carefully, aware of the pressure that would follow. Each step was deliberate, each conclusion provisional until corroborated. The guard respected that pace. It mirrored his own. Later, alone in a waiting room, stripped of insignia and rank, he considered the room again. Not the marks or the lock, but the intention. The room had been selected not for secrecy alone, but for plausibility. A service space, a place where presence could be explained as necessity, where a child's absence might be attributed to schedule rather than confinement. Authority misuse rarely announced itself. It borrowed legitimacy and wore it patiently. When the oversight lead returned, her expression had shifted, subtly but unmistakably. The access credential used to lock the room belongs to a limited group, she said, all senior. The guard nodded. He had expected that. One of them authorized the freeze on the camera feed, she continued. Another restored it. Separation of action. Compartmentalization, the guard said. Yes. Then responsibility will diffuse, he said. She met his eyes. Unless the record holds. They sat with that. The guard was dismissed shortly after, not escorted, simply released back into the world outside the palace's layered control. He stepped into the evening with the sensation of having exited a pressurized environment. Sounds were sharper. Space felt less curated. He walked without destination, allowing the city's unpredictability to recalibrate him. Streetlights reflected off wet pavement. Voices overlapped. No one deferred to his presence. It was an adjustment he welcomed. His device vibrated once more before night fully settled. A message from oversight, brief and unadorned. Inspection confirms external locking and prolonged occupancy. Child testimony consistent. Protective measures sustained. The guard stopped walking. He read it again. No relief surged, only steadiness. He resumed walking, knowing the locked room would now exist in more places than stone and metal. It existed in reports, in testimony,
in the quiet knowledge shared among those forced to confront it. Rooms like that survived on silence. This one no longer had it. The notice arrived without ceremony. It was delivered through an encrypted channel the guards still retained access to, not by right, but by inertia. Systems took time to fully forget a person. He read it standing by a window, morning light cutting across the floor in clean lines. Formal inquiry scheduled, attendance mandatory. Scope, conduct, procedural deviation, data handling. Nothing about the child, nothing about the room. That omission was deliberate. He acknowledged receipt and closed the channel. The hearing took place in a chamber designed to feel neutral, pale walls, soft lighting, no insignia displayed. 3 officials sat at a narrow table, each with a tablet, none wearing expressions that could be read easily. This was not a tribunal, it was an accounting. The guard stood where indicated, no uniform, no visible rank. He felt the absence like a missing limb, not pain, but imbalance. They began with procedure, why he deviated, when he first noticed the door, why he delayed logging the child's statement, why he duplicated restricted data. He answered each question once, precisely, without elaboration. He did not justify, he did not apologize. When asked why he believed the child required protection beyond standard handling, he paused, not for effect, but because the answer required care. Because the environment responsible for his safety had already demonstrated control without oversight, he said. Returning him to that environment without review would have increased risk. One of the officials leaned back slightly. Another made a note. They shifted focus then, subtly, away from events, toward intent. "Were you aware," one asked, "that your actions could be interpreted as insubordination?" "Yes." "Were you attempting to expose senior authority?" "No." "Then what were you attempting to do?" The guard met their gaze evenly. Preserve an accurate record. Silence followed. It lasted longer than comfort required. "Records are handled through proper channels," one official said. "When channels are compromised, the record still matters." That earned him a look, sharp, assessing. They dismissed him after that. No outcome stated, no reassurance offered. He was escorted out through a side corridor that led nowhere familiar, then released. Outside, the city moved on schedule. People passed without noticing him. He welcomed that anonymity. Hours later, the consequence arrived. Termination, effective immediately. Benefits reviewed, access revoked permanently. He read the notice once and closed it. The cost had never been uncertain. What remained was whether the exchange had been worth it. It came quietly, days later, through an indirect channel. A single-page summary from independent oversight, redacted heavily, clinical in tone. Child transferred to long-term protective supervision. Prior supervisory authority suspended pending investigation. Facilities access under review. No names, no acknowledgments, no praise, just outcome. The guard sat at the same table where he had first read the inquiry notice. The light was different now, later in the day, softer. He read the page twice, then folded it and placed it in a drawer. He did not feel triumph. He did not feel vindication. He felt something closer to alignment, a sense that action and consequence had resolved into a straight line, even if it led away from everything familiar. He thought of East Hall, of the door 3 fingers wide, of the child's voice controlled into near silence, of the room designed to look ordinary. He thought of the moment he had chosen not to transmit. That choice had ended his career. It had also ensured the record existed beyond revision. In the weeks that followed, the palace appeared in the news only obliquely. Administrative reshuffling, temporary leave, internal reviews announced and forgotten, language carefully managed. The locked room was never mentioned, but policies shifted quietly. Safeguard clauses expanded. Independent presence increased around minors. Oversight gained access it had not held before. Change did not announce its source. The guard found work elsewhere eventually, not in palaces, not in institutions that thrived on opacity. He took roles where protection was direct, where authority was closer to ground truth. Sometimes, in the quiet before sleep, he thought of the child, not as a figure of vulnerability, but as a person who had learned briefly that refusal was possible, that silence was not the only option. He did not reach out. He did not seek updates. That boundary mattered too. The record was complete. It existed independent of him now. And that was the final measure of success. The palace remained, stone, protocol, tradition intact. But somewhere within its walls, a room no longer functioned as intended, because one night a guard had chosen the record over obedience. And the record, once made, could not be locked away.